Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So, on today's episode, I'm going to be taking you through a complete tier list ranking of all the commanders from Streets of New Capenna, including the precons. We're going to be starting off at the bottom tier, the D tier, with the least powerful commanders from the set, and working our way up to the C, B, then A, and of course ending up at the S tier, which is the most powerful commanders from the set in the precons. Just a quick disclaimer before we jump into these rankings today. These tier rankings are completely subjective. These tier rankings are based off of my own opinions, and a big thank you to my playgroup for their input as well. Your opinions on these tier rankings might differ, and that's okay. Also, these tier rankings exist within the vacuum of Streets of New Capenna, meaning that this is the commanders in this set and the precons in comparison to each other and not compared to any outside commanders. So, just as an example, an S tier commander from this set might not make it into an S tier of another set like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and yeah, again, it's a vacuum. Also, within each tier, commanders are in no particular order. Just because I bring up a commander first or last within a tier does not make it any more powerful or less powerful than any other commander in that tier. And now that we're all on the same page, let's jump into the rankings. So starting off the D tier, we've got Perry the Pulverizer. That's right, one of the face commanders from the precons. Perry is a 3/3 Rhino Soldier that costs 1 green, white, blue, and it has, when it enters the battlefield, put a shield counter on target creature. And again, a shield counter is a new kind of counter from this set. If it would be dealt damage or destroyed, remove a shield counter from it instead. Whenever Perry attacks, target creature you control gains trample and gets +X until end of turn, where X is the number of different kinds of counters among permanents you control. So once this commander gets going, it can definitely do some powerful things, but it can definitely take a while to get going, and you might have to make some pretty less than optimal deck building decisions to really lean into this counter strategy. Obviously, for example, there are plenty of fantastic cards out there that deal with +1/+1 counters, but again, you only get a small benefit for that kind of a counter. To get the most out of this commander, you kind of need to go wide in a counter strategy, utilizing less than optimal cards to get different kinds of counters. And again, the payoff is nice, but in order to actually get that payoff, you need to send your commander into the red zone by actually attacking with it. Now, if you're pumping Perry, great, but if you want to pump something else, then Perry might not be as protected. So again, Perry, you might be an interesting design in a new, unique way to kind of take a deck with different kinds of counters, but you have found yourself in the D tier because of all these factors. Next up, we've got yet another Rhino with Mr. Orfeo the Boulder, a 2/4 Rhino Warrior that costs 1 black, red, green. Mr. Orfeo is a very simple commander. It says, whenever you attack, double target creature's power until end of turn. So, unlike Perry, you don't have to actually attack with Mr. Orfeo in order to get that trigger. It just says whenever you attack, so it can be with any creature. That being said, also unlike Perry, this does not give trample. And obviously it doesn't grant any other form of evasion either. So yeah, you might have a massive creature in play, but if you don't have any way to get that through, doubling it up might not do all that much. When you're just hitting, a creature for 20 damage instead of 10, it still just takes out that one single creature that chump blocked it. Now, obviously, of course, once you're set up properly, you can really take advantage of power and do some cool things. But yeah, Mr. Orfeo, you are in the D tier compared to some of the other crazy commanders from this set. Even though you've got an awesome name. You've definitely got an S tier ranking name, but you're in the D tier. Moving on, we've got Lagrella the Magpie. I am so sorry, Lagrella. A 2/3 human soldier that costs green, white, blue. Lagrella might be the perfect commander for me, but Lagrella is still very much a D tier commander. When Lagrella the Magpie enters the battlefield, exile any number of other target creatures controlled by different players until Lagrella leaves the battlefield. When an exiled card enters the battlefield under your control this way, put 2+1/+1 counters on it. So Lagrella is kind of like a super powered Fiend Hunter where you can exile creatures for each player, and also if your creature comes back into play, it gets counters on it. Now for a very specific deck like my Hunter Tribal deck, this is perfect. But again, for the vast majority of players out there building around this, there's not really much going on with this commander, and that effect, while nice, again, if Lagrella is removed, their opponents just get those creatures back. Now, obviously, there are some value plays that you can do with this by blinking your own things as well, and again, if you are building that specific Fiend Hunter Tribal deck once you get going, cool. But yes, at the end of the day, Lagrella, unfortunately, although you've got a special place in my heart already, you are in the D tier of this list. Please forgive me. I am so sorry. And finally, to round out the D tier, we've got Errant Street Artist, a 0/3 human rogue with Flash, Defender, and Haste that just costs a blue mana. By paying 1 and a blue and tapping her, you copy target spell you control that wasn't cast. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this is a pretty specifically worded ability. Now, obviously, the idea with this one is, for the most part, you copy spells. So there's a decent amount of setup, but once you copy a spell, you essentially are paying an extra 2 mana, again if this is already in play, or 3 mana if you're flashing it in right away, to copy that spell again. Once set up properly, yeah, you can make some massive plays, but it does take a bit to actually get things set up, and while building this deck, make sure you keep in mind that there are certain spells that do copy spells, but you end up casting the copy, so obviously that does not count with this. So because of the amount of setup and because of the limitations on this commander, yes, it is very unique, but it is also in the D tier. But now let's get things started off in the C tier with a very unique commander as well, Vazi, Keen Negotiator. Vazi is a 3/3 human advisor with haste that costs 2 black, red, green. Vazi has tap, target opponent creates X treasure tokens, where X is the number of treasure tokens you created this turn. And whenever an opponent casts a spell or activates an ability, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast it or activate it, put a +1 counter on target creature, then draw a card. This is the type of commander that is heavily dependent upon the player playing the deck. If you are fantastic at politics in commander games, well, this commander could definitely go up the tier rankings. But if you're like me and you are terrible at making deals in Commander and terrible at politics, this is probably where the commander belongs. Yes, you can get benefits from your opponents utilizing the treasures that you give them, but there is that limitation. If they say use 5 treasures on a single spell, you don't get that trigger 5 times, you get that once. You get a counter and you get to draw a card. And that's a lot of resources that you gave that opponent. Now, of course, there are other ways to benefit off your opponents utilizing treasures, or your opponents just having artifacts at the graveyard or whatnot, but yeah. At the end of the day, a political commander like this one is going to be better for certain players than it is for others, and just overall, it is a C ranking tier commander. Moving forward in the C tier, we've got Urbrask, Heretic, Praetor. Urbrask is a 4/4 Phyrexian Praetor with haste that costs 3 red, red. It has, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of their library. They may play it this turn. The first thing that I want to point out with this commander, in comparison to the vast majority of other commanders from this set, this is a mono-colored commander. And yeah, only having access to 1 color versus many of the other commanders in this set having access to 3 colors is a big difference. Urbrask is a decently expensive commander for the effect that it does have. At 5 mana, yes, it can provide you some additional temporary card advantage, and it can hamper your opponents. That being said, this is essentially turning your opponent's draw step draw into temporary card advantage rather than just permanent card advantage, but if it had a bigger effect where it said turned all of their draw into temporary, yeah, that would be much more impactful. And yeah, with that kind of a change, well, this would be a brutal commander, and yeah, it would definitely climb up the rankings and kind of overcome it just being a mono-colored commander. But yeah, with all the other powerful commanders in this set and them having access to more colors, well, that is a big disadvantage that Urbrask did not overcome. So because of that, Urbrask, you are in the C tier. Poor Urbrask. I think within the Praetors, Urbrask was the weakest of the original Praetors, and it's probably going to be the weakest out of these as well. Regardless, next up we've got Cyrix, Carrier of the Flame. Cyrix is an exciting commander for many out there, a 3/3 Phoenix with flying and haste that costs 2 black and a red, so yeah, basically our very first Phoenix commander. It has at the beginning of each end step, if a creature card left your graveyard this turn, target Phoenix you control deals damage equal to its power to any target. And whenever another Phoenix you control dies, you may cast Cyrix, Carrier of the Flame from your graveyard. Now, there are a decent amount of Phoenixes out there that work well with this commander. That being said, Phoenix is not the most heavily supported tribe, and there are some Phoenixes out there that are very specific on their requirements to be brought back and really won't work in this kind of a tribal deck. On top of that, though you can get Cyrix back whenever another Phoenix you control dies, you do have to pay for that cost. And while that is a way to get around commander tax essentially, again, the payoff for this commander might not be all that great. The vast majority of Phoenixes out there have a relatively low power, so you're not going to be dishing out a ton of damage unless you've got a lot of other ways out there to pump your Phoenixes. So yeah, overall an exciting commander for many as the first Phoenix commander that many players have been waiting for, but still, Cyrix, you are in the C tier in comparison to other commanders from the set in the precons. Moving on, we've got Fabine, Boss's Confidant, a 3/6 cat advisor that costs 3 red, green, white. Fabine has creature tokens you control have haste and parlay. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each land card revealed this way, you create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token, then creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn for each non-land card revealed this way, then each player draws a card. Overall, this commander is just pretty expensive for what it does. A 6-mana commander that yes can build your board and yes can pump your team, but it is dependent on factors. That being obviously what's on top of everyone's library, and yes, there are ways to control that and there are ways to play with that, but still. That can be a decent investment in cards for top library manipulation, and on top of that, again, you are benefiting all players, not just yourself, by having everyone draw a card when this happens. There are definitely going to be times where you wish more non-land cards were revealed, and more times where you wish land cards were revealed, so yeah, this commander can definitely be hit or miss. So Fabine, you might have your boss's confidence, but you do not have mine, so you are solidly in the C tier. Okay, that was bad. Anyways. Moving on, we've got Pardness, the Subtle Brush, a 4/4 vampire wizard that costs 2 blue, black, red. She has whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless that player pays 4 life. So basically, ward 4 life for you in all of your things. On top of that, whenever you copy a spell, up to 1 target opponent may also copy that spell. They may choose new targets for the copy. So in my opinion, this commander is very similar to Vazi in that, yeah, if I'm playing this commander, it is probably a C tier commander because I am not good at politicking in commander. I am absolutely terrible at making deals. That being said, someone who is better at politics like Eddie can definitely play this commander in a more powerful way than I'd be able to. Obviously, with this kind of a commander, you want to be able to copy a lot of spells or have spells that actually copy themselves and then make deals with your opponents to have them do what you want them to do with those spells. Yes, that player is going to get some additional value, but they're going to be going along with your game plan. So yeah, again, overall, like Vazi, this is a C tier commander, but one that definitely has the potential to be more powerful depending on who is playing it. If you've got a political mastermind in your playgroup and they are playing this commander, look out. Next up, we've got Oscar Rubbish Reclaimer, a 3/3 human wizard for 3 blue black. Oscar is going to cost 1 less to cast for each different mana value among cards in your graveyard, and whenever you discard a non-land card, you may cast it from your graveyard. Now that first part is just some nice additional value, reducing the cost of your commander. Now, are you going to specifically build your deck just to make sure you've got a ton of different mana values from cards that might not synergize together? Probably not. But what many builds around this commander will be taking advantage of discarding cards and essentially being able to cast them as if they had madness. So you can get some additional value out of discard outlets as well as looting effects, wheel effects, etc, etc, etc. Instead of losing out on those cards that are going to hit your graveyard, you can still cast them again. You do have to cast those cards right away. You do not just get perpetual access to those cards. If you did, obviously, this would be up in the tier rankings. But with the way that this commander is worded, it is a use it or lose it kind of approach. Once you're set up, you can definitely do some powerful things, and there's some really cool synergies with this commander. That being said, I think this commander is solidly in the C tier, even though its name and reference, it's got to be a reference, right, to Oscar the Grouch with Oscar Rubbish, right? Come on. That is definitely also S tier. I mean, not Mr. Orfeo the Boulder, but close. Moving on though, we've got Crow's Defense Contractor, a 2/4 cat advisor that costs 1 green, white, blue. Crow's has at the beginning of your upkeep put a shield counter on target creature an opponent controls. And whenever you put one or more counters on a creature you don't control, tap that creature and goad it. It gains trample until your next turn. So this commander can be a high risk, high reward type of commander. You can definitely distribute a lot of counters out to your opponent's creatures, and many of those counters might be +1/+1 counters to make your opponent's creatures stronger. When you do so, you are tapping them down, which is great, and you are goading them, which is, well, fantastic. Those creatures have to swing out, and they do have trample, so they can get some damage through on your other opponents. And of course, once you get one counter on a creature, you can easily utilize a lot of proliferate effects in these colors to keep that going, and keep goading and tapping down, and giving them trample and forcing them to attack. That being said, again, there is a risk to this. If you do run out of ways to get counters on things, you just have massive creatures that your opponents have now that might just swing at you. On top of that, obviously, in a one-on-one scenario, goading is obviously less effective, though of course there are still ways to win, but yeah. Crows, you are a unique commander, an interesting commander, but you are definitely a C-tier commander, and you're a pretty high-risk, high-reward play, but you can be a lot of fun. And speaking of goading, next up we've got Kit Kanto, Mayhem Diva. Kit Kanto is a 3/3 cat bard druid because that's a thing that costs 1 red, green, white. When Kit enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. And at the beginning of combat on each player's turn, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. When you do, target creature that player controls gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. Goad that creature. So, getting one creature on ETB is nice to help you get things going, and also to set yourself up if you've got populate effects in this deck. That being said, without trigger copying effects like maybe a Stronic Resonator, you are limited to just one creature per opponent that you are goading. And to do so, you do need 2 creatures per every one that you want to goad. So you need a go wide strategy that either has untap effects, or you can go wide enough that you are safe to actually just keep goading your opponent's creatures. Now, of course, there are ways to do this, but it does require a good amount of setup to get things really going. Now, again, not a bad commander by any means, but also in this set and in the precons, there are a ton of more powerful commanders than this one. So yeah, Kit, you are solidly in the C tier. Next up, let's talk about Jaxis the Troublemaker. Jaxis is a 2/3 human warrior that costs 3 in a red that has pay red, tap, discard a card, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. And you can also blitz this for 1 in a red. Now, like Urbrask, obviously, in comparison to a ton of other commanders from this set in the precons, this is a 1-color commander trying to compete against 3-color commanders. It is definitely not a bad effect, and you can do some very powerful things when you're set up properly. If you've got a creature in play that maybe has a powerful ETB, or attack trigger, or LTB, you can really take advantage of that by making additional copies of it. That being said, it does take some setup, and keep in mind again, you are losing out on a card to actually make that token copy. And of course, on top of that, taking all these factors into account, yeah, just being a 1-mana commander in comparison to many of the other commanders, this is definitely a C-tier commander. So, sorry Jaxis the Troublemaker. Moving forward, we've got Cormella, Glamour Thief. Cormella is a 2/4 vampire rogue that has haste that costs 1 blue, black, red. By paying 1, you can tap to add Grixis and spend this mana only to cast instant and or sorcery spells. When Cormella dies, return up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a mana dork in a way that can ramp you, but with a limitation that you can only utilize that mana on instants and sorceries. Now that can still be very helpful, and there are some powerful things that you can do with this, but they do require some setup. On top of that, of course, there are ways to take advantage of that death trigger and bring back instants and sorceries from your graveyard to your hand. This commander does provide you a decent amount of value, and overall a decently solid commander for a Spellslinger type build. And while there are some combos that work with this commander, there are also some limitations on some of those combos as well. That being said, an interesting commander, but one that does not make it out of the C tier. So sorry Cormella, you are solidly there. The C tier might not be one of the most glamorous places to be. But the final commander that is going to round out the C tier is Falco Spara Pactweaver. Falco Spara is a 3/3 bird demon with flying and trample that costs 1 green, white, blue. It's going to enter the battlefield with a shield counter on it, and you may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to paying their other cost. Now, this commander is definitely one that is on the line in my opinion, and one that might have deserved to be pushed up to the B tier. That being said, there are a lot of factors going on with this commander, and one factor in particular that made it so that it's not quite as powerful as it could be. Of course, if you can get creatures in play or effects that can get creatures counters consistently, yeah, you can get a lot of card advantage out of this commander. However, with the way that last line is worded, you may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control that is paying its other cost, could have been worded in a different way, which would make this commander a lot more powerful. If instead, say it was a repeatable ability like remove a counter from a creature you control, you may cast the top card of your library this turn. Now that probably would have been pretty busted, as yeah, that could go infinite with a few things, and you could easily abuse things like Undying and Persist. That being said, with those kinds of mechanics in particular, they kind of have an awkward interaction with this commander with the way that it is currently worded. With those kinds of creatures, you do want them to die so you can actually get a counter on them, so you can utilize those counters to actually cast spells off the top of your library. That being said, if you don't have those resources to actually cast the top card of your library, or the top card of your library is just a land and you've got no way to get rid of that, well, those kinds of creatures are at risk of being permanently removed and not allowing you to utilize them for any additional card advantage. So again, I think this one's kind of on the line, but at the end of the day, I did decide to put Falco Spara in the C tier, so my apologies, Falco Spara. But now it's time for us to move on to the middle of the road tier with the B tier, starting off with Toulouse, Clever Conductor. Toulouse is a 3/1 human rogue that costs Azorius Blue Dimir. When Toulouse enters the battlefield, it connives, which means you draw a card and then discard a card. If you discard a non-land card, you put a +1 counter on this creature. And whenever you discard one or more cards, you exile them from your graveyard. When Toulouse dies, put the cards exiled with it into their owner's hand. So this is kind of like a bag of holding commander, which is a fantastic design, and I really do enjoy it. So yeah, if you discard a lot of cards, Toulouse kind of just keeps them for you at some point. And then, obviously, if you've got maybe a free sacrifice outlet in play, or just a spell that can sacrifice this commander, cool, you can get those cards back. So obviously, you can take advantage of wheel effects, you can take advantage of discard outlets, etc, 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 to just store up a bunch of cards that you can get when you need them. Once set up properly, Toulouse can definitely give you a big burst of card advantage, and yeah, just a very solid commander all around. So Toulouse, because of all these factors, you are in the B tier. Next up in the B tier, we've got Raffine, Scheming Seer. Raffine is a 1/4 Sphinx Demon with Flying and Ward 1 that costs white, blue, black. It has, whenever you attack, target attacking creature connives X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So again, you draw X cards, then discard X cards, and you get a +1 counter on that creature for each non-land card discarded this way. So this is a commander that can definitely benefit you for going wide, and while it can provide a great amount of card selection, it is not card advantage. Now, obviously, there are powerful things that you can do with drawing so many cards and ways to take advantage of that, and also powerful things that you can do with discarding cards as well. That being said, this can be a commander that can be heavily dependent on having a very wide board state, and at a certain point, if that is stopped, this commander can definitely stall. On top of that, while being able to make a creature quite large with all those counters, including itself, essentially you could win with commander damage, there are more powerful things out there and more powerful ways to win with other commanders. So at the end of the day, Raffine, you are a good value commander, but you are a middle-of-the-road commander, and you have found yourself in the B tier. Next up, let's move on to Quasar, Augur of Agonies. Quasar is a 3/4 Cephalid Advisor for 1 white, blue, black. She has, whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. So this is a very simple commander, but one that can be very effective once you're set up properly. In fact, there are multiple ways to combo with this commander and just win outright. Now, you have to be set up for that, and actually there are certain combos that are near infinite, and you need kind of a backup plan to stop from losing yourself, but that's beside the point. This commander doesn't provide you really any actual value itself. Yes, it can gain you some life, but it is more so just the kind of finisher for the deck. It is not a value engine for your deck. The rest of the deck needs to fill in those gaps, and yes, you can definitely benefit off of that life gain and gain additional value, but you need to be set up to do so. So for the most part, yeah, once you get things going and once you're set up, this commander can be incredibly impactful, but at the end of the day, it's a B tier commander. Next up, we've got Agnes the Dragon Slash, a 3/3 Viashino warrior with haste that costs 1 Rakdos red Gruul. She has, whenever a creature you control haste attacks, create a tapped treasure token. Now, this is a commander with a limitation, probably a needed limitation, but one that definitely stopped it from climbing the ranks higher. because those treasures coming into play tapped is key and crucial for this commander and where it fits in the rankings. If those treasures did not come into play tapped, well, there would be some pretty broken things that you can do with this. Not saying that you can't still do broken things with it, but they require some more workarounds with maybe things that can make those treasures come into play untapped. Having to wait to get access to that mana from those treasures definitely can hamper this commander, though you can still do some very powerful things. So at the end of the day, when the dust settles, yeah, you can still generate a lot of value with this commander by swinging with a ton of hasty creatures, and there are plenty of different ways to make your creatures hasty. That could be, an enchantment that maybe gives all your creatures haste, or maybe you've got some threaten effects that can steal your opponent's creatures and you swing with those for some additional value. Overall, a solid commander with a limitation that was probably needed, but because of that limitation, again, this fits in the B tier. Moving on though, we've got Mari the Killing Quill, a 3/2 vampire assassin for 1 black. Mari has, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it with a hit counter on it. On top of that, assassins, mercenaries, and rogues you control have death touch, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may remove a hit counter from a card that player owns in exile. If you do, draw a card and create 2 treasure tokens. So, first up, this commander had one factor obviously going against it just to start. Again, this is a mono-colored commander, and again, like Urbrask and like Jaxis, that does need to be taken into account. That being said, just starting off, this commander is already a fantastic hate bear effect against your opponents. Exiling your opponent's creatures can work fantastically against certain strategies, like, graveyard-centric strategies or reanimator strategies. And obviously that's just part of this card. Giving you access to 3 tribes rather than just one with a lot of tribal commanders is huge for this commander in particular. And yeah, though mercenaries might not have a lot of support, there are tons of great assassins and rogues out there that work great with this commander. Giving those creatures death touch is huge, both offensively and defensively, and of course when you get those creatures through because your opponents probably don't want to block them, again, as long as you've got enough hit counters out there, you draw a card and get 2 treasure tokens for each of those. That is a ton of card advantage and a ton of temporary mana advantage as well. So yeah, again, in this set with all these 3 color commanders, this monocolor commander still packs quite the punch. And again, with all these factors at the end of the day, Mari, you have finished at the B tier. Next up, speaking of rogues, we've got Kamiz Obscura Oculus. Kamiz is a 2/4 cephalid rogue that costs 1 white, blue, black. It has, whenever you attack, target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. It connives, then choose another attacking creature with lesser power. That creature gains double strike until end of turn. So this is a commander that can benefit heavily off of combat damage triggers. Again, unlike Parry and more so like the Boulder, this allows you to attack with any creature to get that trigger. You do not have to attack with your commander and put it into danger. And when you do, being able to make one creature unblockable and giving another one double strike can definitely help you take advantage of those combat damage triggers, which can provide you a ton of value throughout the game. Obviously, you are basically guaranteed to get that one through that is unblockable, and if the other one has evasion that you gave double strike to, you get 2 triggers when that hits an opponent. This is the type of commander that once it gets things rolling, you can do some very powerful things. I mean, being able to just get infect creatures through can be, well, pretty powerful, especially when you've got ones that can already get through on their own and you can give them double strike. Yeah, this commander has some potential, but it does require some setup to get things going. So at the end of the day, Kamiz, you have finished at the B tier. Moving on, we've got Jolene the Plunder Queen, and that's just a fun name to say. Regardless, a 2/2 human warrior for 2 red and a green. Jolene has, whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a treasure token. If you would create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. And by sacrificing 5 treasures, you put 5 +1/+1 counters on Jolene. So this commander does have some potential, but there are some limitations that do hold it back. First up, this commander is kind of like Edric in a way, but not, and with that limitation, it really is hampered. At the end of the day, the amount of treasures that this commander is going to be dishing out is limited. Players just have to attack with 1 creature on any opponent to get that benefit. That includes you, and if you attack with more than 1 creature, that doesn't matter. You don't get additional benefits. So that first part really isn't all that abusable. Now, that being said, obviously if you get extra combats, yeah, sure. Regardless, you are going to be getting more treasures than your opponents with these attacks because you do get an additional treasure whenever you create a treasure token. And that more so is where the power of this commander comes from, and just having a bunch of things that can make treasures can be pretty powerful with it. That being said, obviously also the payoff for this commander is not all that great. Sacrificing treasures to get counters on this commander, not exactly a powerful payment and not the way that I want to be utilizing treasures for the most part. So again, overall, there's a lot of things going on with this commander, but at the end of the day, when the dust settles, Jolene the Plunder Queen, you have a fantastic name to say, and you are in the B tier. Next up, how about Ginny Faye Jetmir's Second, a 3/3 elf druid that costs Gruul Green Selesnya. She has, if you'd create one or more tokens, you may instead create that many 2/2 green cat creature tokens with haste, or that many 3/1 green dog creature tokens with vigilance. Being able to replace tokens can be a very powerful thing, and even broken if you're set up properly. That being said, even without trying to break this, being able to change, what would be 1/1, say, soldier creature tokens into either 2/2 hasty cats or 3/1 vigilant dogs, yeah, that's going to make a big impact. Obviously, on top of that, if you want to go in more of a cat or dog tribal direction, there are some things that you can do with that can be quite impactful as well. That being said, yeah, just increasing the power level of tokens that you're going to be creating, a massive amount of 1/1s into a massive amount of 3/1s, that is a big jump. Now again, Ginny is providing a replacement effect, a powerful one at that, but again, no additional value on its own. So with all these factors in mind, yeah, Ginny Faye, you have finished at the B tier. Which is kind of funny because again, you were Jetmir's Second, and now next up we've got Jetmir Nexus of Rebels. Jetmir is a 5/4 cat demon that costs 1 red, green, white. It says creatures you control get +1/+0 and have vigilance as long as you control 3 or more creatures. Then it's going to give an additional +1/+0 and trample if you've got 6 or more, and an additional +1/+0 on top of that, and double strike if you've got 9 or more. So obviously the big payoff for this commander is once you hit that 9 creature limit. The other two are nice, allowing you to keep creatures back for blocking and to get extra damage through, but that double strike again can really just make a massive impact. Jetmir is not increasing any toughness with these pump effects, so again, although it is an anthem, it's just an anthem for power. So though you can freely swing out with that vigilance, your creatures might be more apt to get taken out. Whereas if you can build up and get to that double strike, well, your creatures are somewhat protected, basically again being able to hit first. Now again, this deck is heavily dependent on you going very wide, and that can spread your resources thin. So it can be a big payoff when you do so, but it also can be a big risk, and if your army is taken out, well, you're back to square one, and you might be in big trouble. That being said, when things are going well, they are going well with this commander, and yeah, the Nexus of Rebels has finished in the B tier. Moving on, we've got another mono-colored commander from this set with Gianna, Font of Hope. Gianna is a 2/2 angel with flying and vigilance that costs 1 and a white. She has each other angel you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each angel you already control. And by tapping, you add white, spend this mana only to cast an angel spell. So again, the same argument can be said, obviously, with this mono-colored commander that I've already brought up with the other ones. That being said, there are a lot of powerful angels out there, and this angel is a fantastic angel tribal commander. Not only does this commander help you ramp to get angels out even quicker, but more importantly, she can make each and every single one of your angels a lot stronger. I mean, even if you just have a 1 or 2 mana angel that might only have 1 or 2 power, by getting them out later in the game when you've already got a lot of angels in play, they are going to get massive when they come into play. That being said, again, you are limited to 1 color, and that color is the weakest of all the colors in Commander with Mono White. And though Mono White is finally starting to get some more cards that can help with its weaknesses, Giada, at the end of the day, you are still solidly in the B tier. But now let's move on to Bess Soul Nourisher, a 1/1 human citizen for 1 green and a white. Bess has whenever 1 or more other creatures with base power and toughness 1/1 enter the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Bess Soul Nourisher. And whenever Bess attacks, each other creature you control with base power and toughness 1/1 gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on Bess. So whereas Giada is an angel tribal commander, this is a tiny tribal commander that focuses on getting 1/1s into play. And actually, there are a lot of powerful 1/1s out there, and yeah, this commander can make your 1/1s hit incredibly hard. I mean, a simple mana dork like a Llanowar Elves can obviously help ramp you in this deck, but it can also just smack one of your opponents for a ton of damage. And keep in mind, obviously, you're not limited to just getting creatures in play to try to get more and more counters on this commander. There are plenty of counter strategies and counter synergies in green and white to do so. So get a ton of tiny creatures in play, pump them with other effects, swing with your commander, make them massive, and hit incredibly hard. Now again, there are some weaknesses to a go-wide strategy such as this one, so yeah, again, at the end of the day when things are going well with this commander, they can go very well, and a simple board wipe might just mess things up if you don't have a way to save your team. So yeah, Bess, because of all of these factors, you have ended up in the B tier. But now it's time to talk about the final commander from the B tier with Benny Brack's Zoologist. Benny Brack's is another mono-white commander, a 3/2 elf druid for 3 and a white. It has Convoke, and it says at the beginning of each end step, if you created a token this turn, draw a card. Out of every single commander in mono white, this commander probably has the most potential when it comes to card draw. Once you're set up properly with one trip around the table, you've got the potential to draw 4 cards, which is just unheard of in mono white. And yeah, Wizards definitely could have, like they have in the past, limited this card further and further and further, but they didn't, and it seems like, yeah, they're finally understanding that mono white needs card draw too. That being said, yes, while this commander can provide you card advantage with something that is desperately needed in mono white, you are still limited to 1 color. On top of that, while you are getting that benefit from drawing a card by making tokens each turn, you do need a lot of other effects to make those tokens more effective. And then of course your tokens have that nice additional benefit, well I should say your creature tokens specifically, to help you cast your commander if it is dealt with. Overall, a solid commander that was a consideration for the A tier, but ended up just ending up in the B tier. But now we are moving on to the A tier, and to start off the A tier, we've got Ziatora the Incinerator. Ziatora is a 6/6 demon dragon with flying that costs 3 black, red, green. It has, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, Ziatora the Incinerator deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target, and you create 3 treasure tokens. So even if you did not get the fling effect from this commander where you get to dish out damage based on a creature's power, you still are getting a lot of value out of sacrificing that creature by getting 3 treasure tokens. But of course you are getting that fling effect, so yeah, you can get some massive creatures in play, make them even more massive, and then fling them at your opponents for a ton of damage. And of course, by maybe giving this commander infect, that can very easily be lethal. So yeah, there are some very powerful things that you can do with this commander, and it can provide you a ton of value throughout the game. 3 treasure tokens is quite a bit to play with, essentially on every single turn, and just in exchange for sacrificing 1 creature. And again, in these colors, there are plenty of other ways to benefit from sacking that creature on top of those treasure tokens. So yeah, Ziatora is definitely a commander that has a lot going for it, and it is definitely a solid commander in the A tier. Moving on, we've got Tivit, Seller of Secrets, a 6/6 Sphinx Rogue with flying and ward 3. It costs 3 white, blue, black, and it says Council's Dilemma. Whenever Tivit enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player starting with you, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, investigate. For each bribery vote, create a treasure token. And while voting, you may vote an additional time. So, at the very least, again assuming that we've got 3 opponents, when this enters the battlefield or hits a player, we get 5 tokens. Now, most likely that's going to be 2 treasures, which we are going to pick, because again, we get to pick an additional time, and 3 clues, which our opponents will most likely pick, though again, that can change based on some scenarios. That being said, still just having an ETB that gives us 2 treasures and 3 clues is fantastic already. On top of that, of course, there are ways to get even more votes, and there are ways to actually make sure that we choose the votes as well, so those can definitely be factors that can be incredibly impactful in a single turn, where we really can go off. And of course, in these colors, yes, there are ways to take advantage of that combat damage trigger like Double Strike, but more importantly, there are ways to really use and abuse that ETB. Essentially, anytime we blink this commander, we get an absurd amount of value. And of course, there are ways to build on that value even further, and yeah, we can do some pretty broken things with this. In fact, yeah, this is one of the many things out there that goes infinite with Deadeye Navigator, so have fun with that. That being said, again, it is not quite an S tier commander, but is definitely solidly in the A tier. Moving on, we've got one of the most unique commanders from this set with the Beamtown Bullies. It's a 4/4 Ogre Devil Warrior because that's a thing with Vigilance and Haste that costs 1 black, red, green. It has tap target opponent whose turn it is, puts target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under their control. It gains haste, goaded at the beginning of the next end step, exile it. So in a way, this is kind of like a bad gifts like Zedru kind of a commander, but for creatures specifically, and this is in Jund, and yeah, this commander is spicy and can do some very powerful things. even with that limitation of it being a non-legendary creature, which I'm pretty sure they just specified for Phage, because that would just be an instant KO on an opponent, shows how powerful this can be. And of course, there are still plenty of ways to essentially just take opponents out just by giving them one creature. I mean, even with very minimal setup and without doing basically anything, you can just, okay, turn 1, I'm going to Faithless Looting, discard 2 creatures, or, you know, Entomb, and even better, I can go search for any card in my library, go put it in my graveyard, cool, I set my creature up that I need. Then you could literally take 2 turns off except for just playing lands, and then on turn 4, get this out, tap it, give that player Leveler, and they lose their library. So yeah, this commander just has a lot of game-ending plays. And of course, keep in mind that you can get those game-ending plays again and again and again if you can just get that creature to die. If you can destroy that creature or get that player to sacrifice it before the next end step, instead of it getting exiled, that creature goes back to your graveyard, then you do it again to another unlucky opponent. So yeah, the Beamtown Bullies is definitely a very solid A-tier commander that can do some pretty disgusting things. Next up, we've got Rigo, Streetwise Mentor, a 2/2 cat citizen that costs Selesnya White Azorius. It's going to enter the battlefield with a shield counter on it, and whenever you attack a player or planeswalker with 1 or more creatures with power 1 or less, draw a card. So this is basically a different version of Edric that is more powerful in some ways and less powerful in others, but overall, yeah. All you need to do is get a lot of low-to-the-ground, cheap, evasive creatures into play and just start swinging. In these colors, especially, you know, unlike Edric, now you've got access to white as well. There are plenty of low-to-the-ground evasive creatures, like, you know, a lot of flyers out there that give you additional value. And yeah, by turn 3, you can end up just swinging with 3 of them, essentially, and drawing 3 cards. And of course, in these colors, there are plenty of other ways to draw even more cards, again, when those creatures actually hit your opponents with things like Reconnaissance or Coastal Piracy, etc., etc., etc. And unlike Edric, that creature doesn't actually have to get through, you get it on attack. But at the end of the day, again, I think a lot of players are going to build around this like Edric has been built around for the most part, which is going to be extra turns, which can be extra annoying and extra powerful. Because once you're set up properly, you can draw like 6+ cards in a turn very easily, and then yes, you can just keep getting another extra turn spell and casting that, and maybe it's an extra turn spell that doesn't exile, so you can get it back with a regrowth, and then you can do it again, and again, and again, and again. So yeah, this commander might be very annoying to certain playgroups, but it also is very powerful, and yeah, it is definitely an A-tier commander. Next up, we've got Henzi Toolbox Torre, a 3/3 Devil Rogue that costs black, red, green. It says each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. On top of that Blitz cost you pay costs 1 less to cast for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. The name of the game with this commander very much can be, hey, sacrifice me, get me back to the command zone, cast me again. And of course, there are plenty of ways to sacrifice this commander for a lot of value in these colors. So get this commander out again and again and again to increase the effectiveness of your Blitz cost reduction. And then once you get to a certain point, you can essentially start casting creatures for free or actually generating even more value by actually casting them with that Blitz cost. And then of course, again, with other aristocrat benefits, whenever you sacrifice your creatures, obviously you're already drawing a card because of that Blitz, but then you can get even more value. And yeah, there are plenty of ways to storm off and even go infinite with this commander with the right build. So this commander can do some very brutal things, and yeah, Henzi Toolbox Story, in my opinion, is very much an A-tier commander. But now we've made it to the last of the A-tier commanders with Denry Klin, Editor-in-Chief. Denry Klin is a 2/2 cat advisor that costs 2 white-blue. It's going to enter the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 first strike or vigilance counter on it. And whenever a non-token creature you control enters the battlefield, if Denry has counters on it, put the same number and kind of counters on that creature. This commander is in the A tier for essentially, well, I would say 1 but 2 reasons. And those would be the mechanics Persist and Undying. Persist is especially effective with this commander. I mean, essentially your Persist creatures, as long as you choose +1/+1 counter for Denry Klin to come in to play with, are going to infinitely come back when they go away. Because again, a Persist creature, if it doesn't have a -1/-1 counter on it when it dies, it comes back into play with one of those counters, but again, this commander is going to give them a +1/+1 counter as well, and those cancel out. So again, if you've got a way to sacrifice that creature for free and gain value from it, that is an infinite amount of value. And the said can be set for undying creatures, though there is one more workaround that you need with that. You actually need to not choose +1/+1 counter with this commander, and you need a way to get a -1/-1 counter on this commander, and there are plenty of ways to do that. And then essentially again, you have infinite value from those creatures coming back infinitely once you're set up properly. Now, obviously, there are other ways to build this commander that aren't nearly as broken, but yeah, if you are building the broken version, this is definitely an A tier commander. But now we've made it to the S tier, and we've got an uncommon commander starting us off with Rocco Cabaretti Caterer. Rocco is a 3/1 elf druid that costs X red, green, white. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you may search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. Very simply, this commander is a tutor from your command zone for any creature in your deck. And of course, because of that, with a deck built around comboing with those creatures, you can easily go infinite, and again, you can essentially guarantee you're going to go infinite. Because with either minimal setup or with enough mana at a certain point, you're just going to be able to win. If, for example, you already drew into one of your combo pieces and you get that into play, all you need to do is cast your commander and get the other creature combo piece, and then just go infinite from there. So whether that's a Kiki Jiki combo, or a Temur Sabertooth Dockside Extortionist combo, or plenty of other combos in these colors, there are a lot of options to just win with this. And of course, this commander can actually just tutor for both pieces of your combo if you've got a way to either bounce this back to your hand, or if you've got a way to just sacrifice it and then recast from your command zone. Yeah, you're paying some additional commander tax, but come on, you're in green, you've got ways to ramp. So yeah, Rocco has a ton of potential for a build that is looking to be as broken as possible. Again, a commander that can tutor out any creature in your deck. Yeah, that's going to be powerful, and yes, that is an S tier effect. Next up, though, we've got Lord Xander the Collector. Lord Xander is a 6/6 vampire demon noble that costs 4 blue, black, red. When he enters the battlefield, target opponent discards half the cards in their hand rounded down. When he attacks, defending player mills half their library rounded down. And when Lord Xander dies, target opponent sacrifices half the non-land permanents they control rounded down. These are all massive effects. Yes, Lord Xander does cost 7 mana, but there are plenty of ways to use and abuse this, even just on Lord Xander coming into play the first time. You might be set up with something like a Molten Echoes that creates a copy of Lord Xander, and then you get that ETB twice, and you get that death trigger automatically because, again, the legend rule applies, and you have to sacrifice, well, in this case, you're going to sacrifice the token copy, and yeah, you make 2 players discard half their hands, or 1 player discard half their hand, and then again, so they basically have no hand. And then the Lord Xander token dying is going to make an opponent sacrifice half of their non-land permanents. These are all massive effects on one commander, and yeah, I mean, that's not even counting that middle effect, which is already awesome as well. Milling a player for half their library, yet there's a couple of cards that combo with that and make it so that it's essentially the entire library. And then obviously, of course, there's other ways to use and abuse this effect. I mean, any kind of a blink effect, or any kind of a way to sacrifice this commander, then bring it right back, or any kind of a clone effect. Yeah, your opponents are going to be very, very, very much in trouble if you've got any kind of a setup with this commander. It's going to be very difficult for your opponents to try to stabilize things when they're losing all of their resources again and again and again. And yeah, at a certain point, your opponents are just going to be done. So yeah, Lord Xander is definitely an S tier commander that can be absolutely brutal to play against. Moving on, we've got Evelyn the Covetous, a 2/5 vampire rogue with flash that costs 2 Dimir Black Rakdos. When Evelyn or another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of each player's library with a collection counter on it. Once per turn, you may play a card from exile with a collection counter on it if it was exiled by an ability you controlled, and you may spend mana as though or mana of any color to cast it. Vampires are a very powerful tribe with a ton of support, and there are a lot of low-to-the-ground vampires that are incredibly effective. Whenever any vampire you have enters the battlefield under your control, including this one, you get access to 4 cards. Again, assuming you've got 3 opponents, but still, 4 cards for every single vampire. Now, once each turn is a limitation, and probably a very needed limitation for this commander, but still, once each turn you can play one of those cards, so on your turn, sure, play whatever you need to, and you can even play a land, because again, it says play, not cast, which is just an absurd amount of value. I mean, again, 4 cards, you're bound to get at least 1 land out of those. And again, on your opponent's turns, you can still cast a card. So yeah, you're bound to get to some instants as well. So sure, do that. This not only gives you access to a lot of your own cards and a ton of card advantage from that, but again, from your opponents as well. So yeah, this commander is in a heavily supported tribe and really makes the most out of those creatures coming into play. And again, there are also blink effects to consider and, also making vampire tokens, because again, this does not limit it to non-token creatures. This is a very powerful tribal commander that has very few limitations, and yeah, vampires are already a very supported tribe that can do some very powerful things, and this commander at the helm, well, look out opponents. So, because of all these factors, Evelyn, you are in the S tier. But now we have gotten to the final commander in the S tier, and of course the final commander in this episode with Anello the Painter. He's a 1/3 vampire assassin with death touch that costs blue, black, red. Yeah, there's a lot of powerful Grixis commanders in this set in the precons. Regardless, it has the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn has Casualty 2. And again, Casualty means that as you cast the spell, you may sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater. When you do, copy the spell and you may choose targets for the copy. This commander takes very limited setup to be absolutely broken. Again, essentially with each trip around the table, you've got the opportunity to copy 4 of your spells. Now, obviously, on your opponent's turns, you're limited to those being instants, but yeah, I mean, copy a fact or fiction, that's still a ton of extra value. And of course, probably the most powerful thing that you can do with this commander is just copy extra turn spell after extra turn spell after extra turn spell, and yeah, just take all of the turns. If you've got the budget for those extra turn spells that don't exile, and you've got other ways to bring them back, good luck to your opponents ever getting a turn again. It takes very minimal setup to actually just ensure that you've got creatures in play to actually sacrifice, and yeah, there's actually just some token generating effects that just essentially do that for you on all of your turns, so your opponents aren't going to get another turn once you're set up properly and once you have the ability to just keep getting extra turn after extra turn. The potential for this commander is just absolutely incredible, and again, even if you aren't building this in an extra turn style strategy, there are still some very powerful things that you can do with it. That being said, yeah, the S tier version is probably that extra turns build. Which again, once it gets going, it can be very hard to stop because, yeah, taking 1 extra turn is already very powerful, but taking 2 from just 1 spell is basically unstoppable. But now I just want to say this episode is coming to a close. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, a big thank you to my playgroup for all their input on these selections. And yeah, comment below with your thoughts on my rankings. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Am I completely wrong on certain things? Do you think Mr. Orfeo the Boulder isn't the best name from the entire set, and why? But of course, also as always, thanks again and have a good one.